Hey guys, tonight we drift quietly across a dark and endless Atlantic, where moonlight shimmers over slow-moving waves, and somewhere beneath that silver surface, an ancient mystery waits in the darkness. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a silent sea, feeling a cool breeze move across your face while distant clouds slowly pass over the stars. There are no crowded streets here, no notifications, no deadlines, just water, wind, and the faint possibility that somewhere beneath the waves lies the memory of a city that may never have existed at all. And yes, you probably won't survive this journey if you were expecting a normal vacation, because tonight we are traveling thousands of years into the past with absolutely no return ticket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where you're listening from and what your local time is. It's always fascinating to imagine this story traveling from one quiet room to another across different cities, countries, and time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin with the simplest thing imaginable, darkness. Not the frightening kind, necessarily. Just the soft darkness that arrives when the lights are low and the world outside has finally become quiet. You can almost hear the ocean breathing. One long wave approaches, folds gently against another, and disappears. Then another follows. You let your attention settle on that rhythm. Atlantis begins here, not with a confirmed archaeological discovery, not with a photograph of ruins beneath clear blue water, and not with a treasure chest waiting on the ocean floor. It begins with a story old enough that even the people who first heard it were already looking backward into their own distant past. To imagine Atlantis, you have to let your modern world be calm, slightly quieter. Forget satellites, underwater robots, digital maps, and glowing screens for a moment. Instead, picture a world where the sea is enormous and mysterious, where traveling beyond the horizon can feel like stepping into another universe. For ancient sailors, the ocean was not simply empty space between destinations. It was a living boundary. Beyond familiar shores lay uncertainty. You can imagine a wooden vessel moving slowly across dark water, its crew watching the horizon for signs of land. The wind fills a simple sail. Ropes creak. The hull rises and falls beneath your feet. Above you, the stars are bright because there are no city lights competing with them. You look outward. Nothing. Then you look back. Still nothing. And somewhere in that enormous emptiness, the idea of a lost island becomes strangely easy to believe. Perhaps there was once a powerful kingdom beyond the known world. Perhaps its buildings were enormous, its harbors crowded with ships, its temples decorated with precious metals. Perhaps its rulers became so wealthy and confident that they believed their civilization could last forever. And perhaps, one terrible day, the sea simply took it away. That is the image that has survived. But before you become too convinced that you are about to discover a sunken metropolis, it is worth remembering something important. Atlantis is not a straightforward historical mystery. The earliest detailed account comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, writing roughly in the 4th century BCE. He presented Atlantis as part of philosophical dialogues rather than as an archaeological report. That distinction matters. You are not holding an ancient travel guide. You are listening to a philosophical story. And yet, the story is so vivid that generations of people have wondered whether something real might be hiding behind it. That question has followed Atlantis for centuries. As you continue your imaginary journey, the sea around you becomes calmer. The horizon stretches endlessly in every direction. You begin to picture a distant island forming from the darkness. At first, you see only a faint outline. Then the coastline becomes clearer. Low hills rise behind a broad harbor. Ships rest quietly near the shore. Beyond them, roads lead inland toward buildings that gleam softly under the morning sun. You move closer. There are gardens, stone walls, bridges, canals, tall structures rising above the surrounding landscape. Everything looks organized, almost impossibly organized. The city seems prosperous, carefully planned, and confident in its own importance. You walk along a broad road and hear the quiet sounds of everyday life. Somewhere nearby, workers are carrying supplies. Merchants are arranging goods. Animals move through narrow passages. Boats slide slowly through waterways connecting different parts of the settlement. Nothing about the scene feels supernatural. That is part of what makes Atlantis so compelling. The legend does not describe a world filled only with monsters and magical creatures. It describes something much more familiar, a society. People work. People trade. People build. People argue. People celebrate. People become ambitious. And eventually, according to the story, they face the consequences of that ambition. You continue walking. The city grows larger around you. Perhaps you notice that many of the structures are circular. Perhaps you see water surrounding sections of the settlement. Perhaps enormous walls appear in the distance, separating one part of the city from another. But the details you are seeing are not archaeological memories. They are imaginative reconstructions based largely on Plato's descriptions and centuries of artistic interpretation. The real Atlantis, if there ever was one, remains beyond your reach. That uncertainty is exactly where tonight's journey lives. You are walking through a place suspended between history and imagination. One foot stands in the ancient Mediterranean world. The other stands in the human imagination. And between them stretches an ocean. As the evening deepens around you, the imagined city becomes quieter. The markets slowly empty. Boats rest against their moorings. Lamps appear in windows. Somewhere in the distance, waves move against the harbor walls. You stop beside the water. For a moment, everything feels peaceful. You might almost believe that this place is real. Then you remember the most important part of the story. Atlantis is supposed to be lost. And so, beneath the calm surface of this beautiful evening, you sense something waiting. Not yet. There is no need to hurry. Tonight is not about chasing the mystery. It is about slowly wandering through it. You turn away from the water and follow a quiet road toward the heart of the ancient story, where a Greek philosopher will eventually describe a civilization so remarkable that people thousands of years later would still be searching for it. And as you walk, the modern world grows farther away. The lights disappear. The sound of traffic fades. The Atlantic becomes darker, and Atlantis waits patiently in the distance. You remain beside the quiet water, watching the imagined city of Atlantis shimmer in the distance. The night is still, and the ocean moves with the slow patience of something that has been here long before you arrived. Now your journey carries you farther back, far beyond modern maps, beyond underwater expeditions, beyond all the stories written about Atlantis after the ancient world had already disappeared. You arrive in Greece. The landscape is warmer here. Olive trees move gently in the breeze. Pale stone catches the afternoon sun. Somewhere nearby, people speak in the familiar rhythms of an ancient city, while sandals scrape across dusty paths and distant voices rise from a marketplace. And somewhere within this world, a philosopher named Plato is telling a story. This is where Atlantis enters recorded history, not as a discovered ruin, not as a sailor's confirmed sighting, but as words. You can imagine yourself walking through an ancient Athenian setting, following the sound of conversation toward a quiet courtyard. There, several people are gathered around one another, discussing questions about society, justice, courage, government, and human nature. The conversation is not hurried. Ancient philosophical discussions rarely seem interested in rushing anywhere. You sit nearby and listen. The names are unfamiliar at first, but one voice begins telling a story about an ancient conflict between Athens and a powerful island civilization. That island is Atlantis. Suddenly, the conversation becomes much more interesting. The story says that Atlantis existed far back in time, beyond the familiar history of the Greeks. It was described as an extraordinarily prosperous and powerful island society. You look up. An island civilization? A great kingdom? A city surrounded by the sea? You might immediately begin imagining towers and temples. But Plato's purpose was not simply to entertain you with a mysterious travel story. The Atlantis narrative appears in two dialogues associated with Plato, Timaeus and Critias. And this is where things become especially fascinating. Because Plato was a philosopher, he was interested in how societies functioned, how people behaved when given power, and what happened when ambition became greater than wisdom. Atlantis, therefore, becomes more than a lost island. It becomes an example, a warning, a thought experiment. You listen as the story describes an ancient world in which Atlantis possesses enormous resources and considerable power. Its people have fertile land. They have metals. They have ships. They have wealth. They have organized government. They have impressive buildings. And they seem to. For a while, everything works. The island grows prosperous. Its people become influential. Its rulers govern a large territory. But gradually, something changes. The civilization becomes increasingly ambitious. And this is one of the most important ideas in the entire story. Atlantis does not begin as an evil place. It begins as an impressive one. That makes its eventual downfall more meaningful. You can imagine Plato's audience listening carefully. They already knew stories about powerful kingdoms. They already understood that wealth could disappear. They had watched cities rise and fall. They knew that political power could be temporary. So when Plato describes an enormous island civilization eventually destroyed by catastrophe, his audience would not necessarily need to believe that the island literally existed. The story could work on another level. It could ask a question. What happens when a successful society forgets the qualities that made it successful? You sit quietly as the ancient conversation continues. The sunlight begins to fade across the courtyard. The stone beneath you has absorbed the warmth of the day. A breeze passes through the olive branches, and Atlantis begins to feel less like a treasure hunt and more like a mirror. The story reflects human behavior. People build, people prosper. People become comfortable. Then people want more. The pattern is ancient and strangely familiar. You think about how easily a civilization might begin to believe that its achievements make it invulnerable. Imagine walking through Atlantis during its greatest period. The harbor is crowded. Merchants arrive from distant lands. The streets are busy. The fields are productive. The temples are magnificent. The walls appear almost impossible to overcome. Looking around, you might assume the city will remain exactly like this forever. Why wouldn't it? Everything seems to be working. The island has resources. The government has power. The people have wealth. The sea provides access to distant regions. The buildings are strong. The roads are maintained. The city appears permanent. But history has a habit of reminding people that permanence is mostly an illusion. Even real cities that have survived thousands of years have changed enormously. Governments vanish. Languages disappear. Buildings collapse. Rivers change course. Coastlines move. And sometimes, entire communities are forgotten. You return your attention to Plato's story. There is another important detail. The Atlantis narrative was presented as taking place in an extremely distant past, supposedly thousands of years before Plato's own era. The story claims that information about this ancient civilization had been preserved through earlier traditions and eventually passed to the Greek world. The details involve Egyptian priests and an ancient conversation connected with Solon, the Athenian statesman. You can imagine the story traveling across generations. One person tells another. A priest tells a visitor. A traveler carries the tale home. A poet or philosopher reshapes it. Centuries pass, and eventually, Plato writes it down. That is already enough to make you wonder. How much of an ancient story can survive such a long journey unchanged? Probably very little. Stories evolve. Names shift. Places become more distant. Events become larger. Memories become legends. And legends sometimes become history in the minds of people who hear them much later. You walk slowly through the imaginary Athenian landscape. The city around you is alive. There are craftsmen working with metal. Merchants negotiating prices. Children moving through narrow streets. Donkeys carrying loads. Ships arriving from distant islands. The Mediterranean sunlight shines across everything. This is the real world surrounding the fictional or philosophical Atlantis story. And that contrast is important. Plato lived in a world where geography understood differently from today. The Greeks knew many regions around the Mediterranean, but enormous portions of the planet remained unknown to them. The Atlantic Ocean was a distant and mysterious place. The idea of an enormous island beyond the known world would therefore have carried a special sense of wonder. You can almost feel the temptation. What might exist beyond the horizon? Perhaps islands. Perhaps strange peoples. Perhaps monsters. Perhaps nothing at all. The human imagination has always filled empty spaces. Atlantis is one of the most famous examples. You return to the story. Plato describes Atlantis as being located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, generally associated with the area around the Strait of Gibraltar. To ancient listeners, that placed Atlantis somewhere beyond the familiar Mediterranean world. The phrase would have immediately created distance. You were leaving the known sea. You were heading toward the unknown. And now, in your imagination, you stand at that boundary. The Mediterranean stretches behind you. Ahead lies the Atlantic. The water is darker. The horizon seems larger. There is no modern navigation equipment, no satellite signal, no digital map telling you exactly where you are. Only wind, stars, currents, and human judgment. You look west. Somewhere beyond that horizon, according to the story, Atlantis once existed. Or perhaps it never did. You cannot know. And that uncertainty is what keeps you walking. The sun sinks lower. The ancient city of Athens begins to glow beneath the evening light. You hear distant voices. A bird calls from somewhere beyond the courtyard. The philosophical conversation continues quietly. And Atlantis, still only a story, begins its long journey through human imagination. It will be copied, discussed, debated, translated, reinterpreted, and eventually, thousands of years later, people will still be asking the same simple question. Where was Atlantis? But tonight, you do not need to answer it. For now, you simply let the question remain open. You turn back toward the sea. The horizon darkens. The imagined island is waiting somewhere beyond it. And as the first stars appear overhead, you begin walking toward the next part of the story. You leave the quiet Athenian shoreline behind and continue westward in your imagination, carrying only the story of Atlantis with you. The sea stretches ahead. For a while, there is nothing but water. The ancient world becomes smaller behind you, until Greece is no more than a distant memory. You are moving into the space that Plato placed beyond the familiar boundaries of his world, toward an island that belongs somewhere between history, philosophy, and legend. You know the story now. Atlantis was supposedly ancient even to the ancient Greeks. That makes the tale feel almost impossibly old. You try to imagine what it means to remember something from a time thousands of years before your own lifetime. Even today, when written records, photographs, museums, and digital archives preserve enormous amounts of information, the distant past can become blurry. Now imagine having none of those modern tools. No photographs, no video, no satellite images, no searchable databases, only stories. A memory passed from one person to another, a name repeated around a fire, a description written down generations after the supposed event. And somewhere inside that chain of memory, Atlantis appears. You picture yourself sitting beside an ancient storyteller. The fire burns low. Around you, listeners remain quiet. The storyteller describes a great island surrounded by the sea. He speaks of its enormous wealth, its powerful rulers, its fertile fields, its impressive buildings, its military strength. The listeners lean closer. You do too. But there is something strange about the story. The older it becomes, the larger it seems. That is one of the mysteries of human memory. Events can become simplified. Details can disappear. Other details can grow. A small settlement may become a great city. A local conflict may become a war between civilizations. A natural disaster may become the destruction of an entire world. That does not necessarily mean someone is lying. It simply means stories change when people carry them across time. You walk slowly through this imagined landscape of memory. Atlantis rises ahead of you. At first, it is only a distant coastline. Then you notice walls. Beyond the walls, buildings. Beyond those buildings, towers and temples. The closer you come, the larger the city becomes. You realize that the Atlantis described by Plato was not imagined as a tiny island village. It was presented as a highly organized civilization. Its territory was divided. Its people cultivated the land. Its rulers governed. Its engineers constructed waterways and defenses. Its ships traveled. Its wealth supported enormous projects. In other words, Atlantis was supposed to function like a complete civilization. That detail matters, because the fascination with Atlantis is not really about one building. It is about an entire world. You step onto the imagined island. Warm sand lies beneath your feet. The sea is calm. The air smells faintly of salt and vegetation. Ahead, a road leads inland. You follow it. On either side are fields. Farmers work beneath the morning sun. They guide animals. They carry baskets. They repair irrigation channels. Nothing looks magical. The ordinary details make the imagined civilization strangely believable. You continue toward the city. The road becomes wider. Stone structures appear. Water moves through carefully constructed channels. Bridges cross the waterways. People travel between different districts. The city seems designed around water. And according to Plato's description, that is one of the most distinctive features of Atlantis.
The central area was associated with a series of circular land rings and waterways. You picture enormous circles surrounding one another. Land, water, land, water. Each ring connected by bridges and channels. At the center, the most important buildings rise above everything else. The effect would have been extraordinary. Even by ancient standards, such a city would have appeared monumental. You stand at the edge of one of the waterways and watch a small boat pass. The water is clear. Reflections of stone buildings ripple across its surface. A child runs across a nearby bridge. A merchant calls to someone farther down the street. A worker carries a bundle of materials toward a construction site. The city is alive. And yet you know that you are walking through something that may never have existed. That thought follows you quietly. It does not need to interrupt the story. Instead, it makes the experience stranger. You begin thinking about why humans create imaginary cities in the first place. A perfect city is often a way of imagining a perfect society. A ruined city can become a warning. A lost city can become a symbol of everything humanity fears losing. Atlantis can represent all three. You move deeper into the city. The architecture becomes more impressive. Large public spaces open before you. Stone columns rise overhead. Gardens surround fountains. Canals divide neighborhoods. In the distance, ships enter the harbor. Everything seems connected. There is order everywhere. Perhaps that is exactly what Plato wanted you to notice. A civilization can appear perfect from the outside. It can possess wealth, power, technology, and organization. But none of those things guarantee wisdom. You stop beneath the shade of a large tree. The afternoon sun has become softer. For a moment, you simply watch the city. People continue with their lives. A woman carries pottery. A group of workers repairs a stone wall. Sailors unload cargo. Children play beside a canal. Someone laughs. Someone argues. Someone hurries home. This is perhaps the most human part of Atlantis. Not the temples, not the wealth, not the mysterious disappearance. The ordinary people. Plato's story survives because the civilization feels complete enough to imagine living inside it. You could wake up there. You could walk its streets. You could buy food in its markets. You could board a ship in its harbor. You could sit beside one of its canals at sunset. And perhaps, after several days, you would stop thinking about how unusual the city was. It would simply become home. That is how imagined worlds become powerful. They stop feeling like stories. They begin feeling like memories. You continue walking. The central district approaches. The buildings become larger. The roads wider. The waterways more carefully constructed. You can see the highest part of the city ahead. There, according to the story, the most important structures would have stood. You do not rush toward them. Tonight there is no need. You take the long way. You pass gardens. You cross bridges. You watch ships move through the canals. The sun begins to lower. Shadows stretch across the stone streets. The city becomes quieter. And as evening approaches, you begin to understand another reason Atlantis has remained so famous. It is not simply a place. It is a question. Could a civilization disappear so completely that almost nothing remained? Could a disaster erase an entire society? Could an old memory survive when the physical world had vanished? Or could Atlantis simply be a story created to make a philosophical point? You have no final answer. And perhaps that is the reason the story remains alive. A mystery with a confirmed solution eventually becomes history. A mystery without an answer can remain a legend for thousands of years. The sky darkens. You walk toward the water once more. Behind you, the imagined city glows softly in the fading light. Ahead lies the sea. You stand quietly on the shore. The waves move in and out. The same ocean that once seemed enormous to ancient sailors now surrounds the city of your imagination. You look back one final time. Atlantis is still there, for now. Its streets are quiet. Its gardens are peaceful. Its canals reflect the last traces of sunset. And somewhere beyond the visible world, the boundary between memory and myth becomes thinner. You take a slow breath. Then you turn toward the city again. There is still much more to see, because if Atlantis was once imagined as a civilization at the height of its glory, then the next step is to enter its daily life and see what it might have felt like to wake up there on an ordinary morning. The mystery can wait. For tonight, you simply keep walking. You wake to the sound of water, not crashing waves, not a storm. Just the gentle movement of a canal flowing somewhere beyond the walls of the room. For a few quiet seconds, you forget that you are imagining a city that may never have existed. You open your eyes. Soft morning light enters through a simple window. Outside, Atlantis is beginning another ordinary day. You step into the street. The air is cool, carrying the scent of seawater, fresh earth, and smoke from early cooking fires. Above the rooftops, the sky is turning from pale gray to warm gold. The city is already awake. A small boat moves silently along the canal. A merchant lifts a wooden shutter. Someone sweeps dust from a stone pathway. Workers carry baskets toward the marketplace. There is nothing dramatic happening, and that is exactly what makes the scene feel peaceful. You are not here to witness the destruction of Atlantis. Not yet. You are here to see it at the height of its imagined prosperity. The city stretches around you in carefully arranged circles. Waterways curve through the landscape. Stone bridges connect different districts. Gardens occupy open spaces between buildings. Roads lead toward the central areas. From where you stand, the entire settlement feels planned rather than accidental. You begin walking. Your first stop is the marketplace. The farther you go, the more voices you hear. Merchants call out to customers. Wooden carts roll over stone. Clay jars are arranged in rows. Fresh food is displayed beneath simple coverings. Bundles of cloth hang from wooden frames. Metal objects catch the morning light. You slow down to look. A merchant notices you. He smiles. You probably look like the most confused traveler in Atlantis, but fortunately, nobody seems to mind. You continue through the market. The goods suggest a society connected to many different regions. Ships bring materials from distant shores. Some products are made locally. Others have traveled across the sea. The harbor is therefore more than a place where ships come and go. It is the city's connection to the wider world. You leave the market and follow a road toward the water. The harbor opens before you. Several wooden ships rest beside stone docks. Sailors move between vessels. Ropes are coiled. Cargo is unloaded. Workers carry amphorae and wooden containers toward warehouses. The scene is busy but orderly. There is a rhythm to everything. Lift, carry, load, move, repeat. You watch for a while. Then you notice something beyond the harbor. The city's outer landscape is remarkably green. Fields stretch toward the hills. Trees line the roads. Water channels carry moisture toward agricultural areas. The island seems fertile, and that fertility is important to the story. A wealthy city cannot remain wealthy without food. Behind every magnificent temple and every impressive harbor are fields, farmers, animals, storage rooms, and people doing ordinary work. You walk toward the countryside. The city gradually becomes quieter behind you. The sounds of the market fade. You hear birds instead. A farmer guides an animal through a field. Another worker checks an irrigation channel. Nearby, fruit trees stand in neat rows. You stop beside a stream. The water is clear. You kneel and place your hand near the surface. It is cool. For a moment, the enormous legend of Atlantis becomes surprisingly simple. A city needs water. A city needs food. A city needs roads. A city needs people willing to maintain everything. Without those things, even the grandest civilization becomes empty stone. You continue along the countryside road. From here, Atlantis looks almost peaceful enough to last forever. The city walls rise in the distance. Temples stand above the rooftops. The harbor glitters beneath the sunlight. Ships move slowly across the bay. Everything appears secure. Everything appears permanent. You begin to understand why the imagined citizens might have believed in their own greatness. Success can be convincing, When your harvests are plentiful, your buildings are strong, your ships are numerous, and your neighbors respect your power, it becomes easy to assume tomorrow will look like today. You return toward the city. Along the road, you pass workers constructing a new building. Stone blocks are stacked nearby. Several craftsmen shape pieces with hand tools. The work is slow. There are no machines, no cranes, no engines. Every block represents human effort. You watch as one worker carefully measures a stone before another begins shaping it. The process is patient, almost meditative. Ancient construction often required enormous amounts of labor, planning, and time. A magnificent building was not created in an afternoon. It was the result of countless small actions. One stone, then another, then another. You move on. A bridge appears ahead. You cross it and enter another section of the city. This neighborhood is quieter. Large homes sit behind low walls. Gardens grow beside them. Fountains provide soft background noise. You hear conversation from inside one building. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs. A dog moves across the street. The details are ordinary, but that is how civilizations are experienced, not as maps, not as statistics, not as monuments, as mornings, meals, work, conversations, walks, and evenings. You follow a canal deeper into the city. The water reflects the surrounding architecture. A small boat passes beneath you. The boatman raises a hand. You return the gesture. The city seems strangely friendly. Perhaps that is another reason Atlantis became such a powerful legend. It is easy to imagine yourself there. You can place yourself beside its canals. You can hear its harbor. You can smell its markets. You can watch the sun rise over its walls. You can almost feel the stone beneath your feet. The imagined world becomes familiar. Then you reach the central district. Everything here is larger. The roads are broader. The buildings are more impressive. The waterways are carefully maintained. Public spaces open between monumental structures. At the heart of the city stands a grand temple complex. You approach slowly. Tall columns rise above you. Stone stairs lead upward. Decorative carvings cover portions of the walls. The structure dominates the surrounding landscape. You stand at the bottom of the steps and look up. Whatever Atlantis was supposed to represent, this building represents confidence. A civilization that believes it has the ability to shape the world around it. The temple is not simply a place of worship. It is a statement. We can build this. We can maintain this. We belong here. We will remain. You climb a few steps. From the higher ground, you can see much of the city. The circular waterways curve away into the distance. Gardens appear like patches of green. The harbor is crowded with ships. Beyond everything lies the ocean. Blue, endless, quiet. You watch a ship leave the harbor. Its sail catches the wind. Slowly, it moves toward open water. Perhaps the sailors are carrying trade goods. Perhaps they are exploring. Perhaps they are returning to a distant settlement. You cannot know. The ship becomes smaller, then smaller again. Eventually, it is little more than a dark shape against the horizon. You remain there. The wind moves through the columns. The sun begins its slow journey westward. Atlantis continues below you. And for a moment, the city feels completely alive. This is the Golden Age. The period before the story turns dark. The time when prosperity seems normal. When people wake each morning, expecting another ordinary day. When the future appears safe. You descend from the temple. By evening, the marketplace is quieter. The harbor settles. The canals turn golden beneath the sunset. Oil lamps begin appearing in windows. You find a quiet place beside the water. The city behind you is still making soft sounds. A distant conversation. A wooden cart. Footsteps on stone. Water against the canal wall. You close your eyes. Atlantis has no need to impress you anymore. Its greatest achievement is simply existing. For one peaceful evening, you allow yourself to believe that the city will continue like this forever. But somewhere beneath that thought is the knowledge that stories like Atlantis are rarely about forever. And tomorrow, you will meet the people who you remain beside the quiet canal as night settles over Atlantis. The lamps along the stone pathways flicker gently. The water carries their reflections away in long golden lines. Behind you, the great city has become quieter, but the central district still glows softly beneath the stars. You begin thinking about the people who supposedly ruled all of this. A city this large needs more than roads and canals. It needs leadership. It needs laws. It needs someone to decide where the wall should be built, which ships should be protected, how the farmland should be managed, and how the enormous resources of the island should be divided. According to Plato's story, the rulers of Atlantis were connected to a much older and more mysterious beginning. And this is where the myth becomes distinctly Greek. You walk toward the highest part of the city. The road climbs slowly. The sounds of ordinary life fade behind you. Ahead stands the sacred center, associated in the story with Poseidon, the powerful Greek god of the sea. Poseidon is not simply a minor figure in Greek mythology. He is one of the great Olympian gods. He is associated with the sea, earthquakes, horses, and immense natural power. For a civilization surrounded by ocean, the connection is almost too perfect. You look toward the dark water beyond the city. The sea is calm tonight, but ancient people knew that calm water could change. Waves could rise. Storms could arrive. Earth could shake. The coastline could become dangerous. To imagine the sea as a divine force was therefore not difficult. It was part of everyday reality. You continue upward. According to the story, Atlantis began when Poseidon became connected with a mortal woman named Cleito. Their union becomes the mythic beginning of the royal family. You pause beside an ancient stone wall and let the story unfold in your imagination. Long before the great city existed, there was supposedly a hill surrounded by fertile land. Cleito lived there. Poseidon protected the place and arranged the landscape around it. The story describes rings of water and land being created around the central hill. You picture the transformation. First, a hill rises above the landscape, then a channel of water surrounds it. Another ring of land appears. Then another channel. The pattern expands outward. Water, land. Water, land. A carefully arranged circular landscape. From above, it would have looked almost like a giant symbol carved into the island. You stand at the center of your imagined Atlantis. The water moves quietly through the channels. The city has not yet become the enormous civilization you saw earlier. It is still young, still forming. The royal family has not yet reached its greatest power, but the foundations are already there. According to Plato's account, Poseidon and Cleito had several sons. These sons became the ancestors of the royal rulers of Atlantis. The eldest was Atlas. And this is another fascinating detail. The name Atlantis itself is connected to Atlas. The island is associated with him, and the surrounding ocean becomes part of the mythology that later generations would remember. You walk through the imagined royal district. The buildings here are more carefully decorated. The roads are wider. Guards stand near entrances. Gardens surround the residences. But the city still feels young. You can almost imagine the first generations growing up here. They inherit a powerful story. Their ancestor was connected to a god. Their island was protected by divine favor. Their family ruled over a land surrounded by water. That kind of origin story would give a royal dynasty enormous symbolic power. Most ancient rulers understood the importance of stories. A king was not simply a person with soldiers. A ruler needed legitimacy. People needed a reason to accept the authority of the royal family. Divine ancestry was one of the most powerful explanations available. If your ancestors were connected to the gods, your rule could appear natural. You continue toward the center. The palace rises ahead. Its walls are impressive, though not necessarily magical. Stone columns support broad roofs. Courtyards connect different sections. Gardens surround the main buildings. Water flows through channels nearby. You imagine the royal family waking here each morning. Servants arrive. Officials bring reports. Messengers deliver news from the harbor. Farmers and merchants depend on decisions made inside these walls. The entire civilization is connected to the palace. But the palace is also connected to the mythology. That is what makes it different from an ordinary royal residence. You walk through a quiet courtyard. A fountain murmurs nearby. An old olive tree stands beside the wall. You look at it for a moment. The tree seems peaceful. Ancient societies often associated trees with continuity. A tree survives one generation. Then another. Then another. Its branches grow while people come and go beneath them. The royal family of Atlantis is imagined in much the same way. One generation passes power to the next. The names change. The rulers change. But the kingdom remains. At least for a while. You move deeper into the royal district. A large meeting hall opens before you. Inside, several rulers might have gathered to discuss the affairs of the island. You imagine the scene. Maps are spread across a stone table. Messengers wait nearby. Officials discuss ships. Farmers need water. Builders need stone. Merchants want safer trade routes. The royal family listens. Decisions are made. Outside, the city continues its ordinary life. This is how power works in a civilization. Most people rarely see the decisions being made at the top. They simply experience the results. A repaired road, a new harbor wall, a tax, a law, a shipment of grain, a military order, a festival. The rulers may sit in quiet rooms, but their decisions travel outward through thousands of lives. You leave the meeting hall. The night air feels cooler now. The ocean breeze moves through the gardens. You walk toward a terrace overlooking the city. From here, Atlantis appears enormous. The circular waterways shine beneath the moon. The harbor rests in darkness. A few ships carry lamps. The outer fields disappear into the night. You think about Atlas. If the island's name truly connects with him, then every part of this landscape carries a reminder of the royal family. The island is not simply Atlantis. It is the domain of a dynasty. A kingdom built around ancestry. A civilization that believes its rulers have a special connection with the divine. And yet there is something else worth noticing. Poseidon is a god of the sea. The people of Atlantis are surrounded by that sea. Their wealth depends on it. Their ships travel across it. Their harbor opens toward it. Their entire identity is connected to water. That relationship feels almost poetic. The same ocean that gives them food and trade can also become dangerous. The sea is generous. The sea is unpredictable. The sea does not care about kings. You remain on the terrace. The moon rises higher. The city below becomes almost silent. You can hear only the faint movement of water. It is easy to imagine the ancient rulers standing here too. Perhaps they looked over the same canals. Perhaps they believed their kingdom would last forever. Perhaps they looked toward the horizon and felt secure. After all, their civilization was powerful. Their ancestors were supposedly connected to Poseidon. Their island was fertile. Their walls were strong. Their ships were numerous. Why should they fear anything? You let the thought remain for a moment. Then you remember how stories work. A golden age is rarely described without a contrast. If the beginning is filled with divine favor, prosperity, and order, the later chapters often bring ambition, pride, and decline. Atlantis is no exception. But that part of the story can wait. Tonight, you are still standing in the peaceful age. The royal gardens remain quiet. The sea remains calm. The palace lamps continue to glow. You slowly walk back down the hill. As you descend, the ordinary sounds of the city return. A distant voice, footsteps. A wooden boat moving along a canal. Somewhere, a door closes. Atlantis is still alive. Its royal line still rules. Its people still wake each morning expecting another ordinary day. And somewhere above them, the story of Poseidon and the first rulers continues to shape the identity of the island. You reach the water again. The canal carries a faint reflection of the stars. You sit beside it. The city has become peaceful enough for sleep, and while the water moves quietly past you, the story carries you toward the next question. What happened when this royal family became the rulers of an enormous maritime power? Because Atlantis was not imagined as an isolated island, its influence was supposed to stretch far beyond its own shores. And tomorrow, in the story, you will follow it supposedly ruled this remarkable island. For now, the water continues to move. The city grows quiet, and the golden age of Atlantis settles gently into the night. You remain beside the quiet canal, watching the palace lights shimmer across the water. The night has become deeper now. Atlantis sleeps around you, or at least the version of Atlantis that exists inside the old story. You have walked through its markets. You have seen its harbor. You have climbed toward its royal district. You have imagined its rulers and listened to the story of Poseidon and the royal family. But there is another civilization waiting in the distance. Athens. And this is where the story of Atlantis becomes more than a description of a lost island. It becomes a comparison. Two civilizations. Two ways of living. Two ideas about power. You leave the canal and begin walking toward the western edge of the imagined city. The road is quiet. The moon hangs low over the water. With every step, Atlantis seems to become more distant. Eventually, the city disappears behind you. You find yourself standing beside the sea. A gentle breeze moves across the surface. You close your eyes. When you open them again, the landscape has changed. You are back in ancient Greece. The air feels different. The architecture is familiar. The land is drier. Olive trees cover the hillsides. The Mediterranean stretches beneath a bright morning sky. And somewhere nearby is Athens. To understand why Plato created the contrast between Athens and Atlantis, you have to understand the kind of questions he was interested in. He was not simply asking which city had better buildings. He was asking what makes a society good. What makes people just? What happens when a government becomes too powerful? Can wealth make a civilization stronger? Or can wealth eventually weaken it? You walk through an ancient Athenian street. The city is busy. Citizens gather in public spaces. Craftsmen work. Merchants sell goods. Ships move through the nearby harbor. Athens is not perfect. It is not presented as a magical city. It is simply a human society. And that matters. Because in Plato's story, Athens becomes the moral contrast to Atlantis. Atlantis possesses enormous power. Athens represents restraint. Atlantis has wealth. Athens is associated with virtue. Atlantis expands outward. Athens defends itself. At least that is how the story presents the comparison. You continue toward the center of the city. Stone buildings rise around you. A group of citizens discusses politics. Someone is arguing about a public issue. Another person listens. A merchant passes carrying a basket. A child runs between two adults. The city is noisy, lively, human. You can almost hear the rhythm of ancient Athens. Plato lived in this world. He knew that Athens could be brilliant and deeply flawed at the same time. Its political system was innovative. Its philosophers were influential. Its artists created remarkable works. Its sailors traveled widely. But Athens also experienced war, political conflict, inequality, and defeat. The city was not an ideal society in reality. So when Plato uses an idealized version of Athens in the Atlantis story, he is doing something deliberate. He is creating a model, a thought experiment. You enter a quiet courtyard. A philosopher is speaking to a small group. You sit nearby. The conversation turns toward justice. What makes a person just? What makes a city just? The questions seem simple. They are not. A city can be wealthy and still be unjust. A city can be powerful and still be unstable. A ruler can be successful and still make terrible decisions. And a civilization can have impressive technology without possessing wisdom. These ideas sit quietly underneath the Atlantis story. You look back toward the sea. Imagine Atlantis on one side, Athens on the other. One is enormous. One is relatively modest. One is wealthy. One is disciplined. One dominates the sea. One stands for courage and self-control. Again, this is Plato's construction. It is not a neutral historical comparison. The Athens in the story is idealized. The Atlantis in the story is designed to eventually demonstrate what happens when power becomes corrupted. You continue walking. The sun rises higher. You reach a hill overlooking Athens. From here, the city spreads across the landscape. Temples rise above the rooftops. Roads connect different districts. The sea lies beyond. The view is beautiful, but the city is smaller than the Atlantis you imagined. And that difference is important. Atlantis is designed to impress you. Athens is designed to make you think. You sit beneath an olive tree. The breeze is gentle. A few leaves move above your head. You think about how easy it is to confuse size with greatness. A larger army does not necessarily mean better leadership. A richer city does not necessarily mean happier people. A larger harbor does not necessarily mean a stronger society. The Atlantis story plays with this idea. Its civilization has everything. And yet, something is missing. According to Plato, the people of Atlantis gradually become less virtuous. Their desire for wealth and power grows. The divine qualities associated with their ancestors become weaker. Human ambition becomes stronger. The rulers become increasingly interested in expansion. You can imagine how slowly that change might happen, not in one dramatic moment. There is no single morning when everyone suddenly becomes selfish. Instead, small decisions accumulate. A little more territory, a little more wealth, a little more influence, a little more military power. Each decision seems reasonable on its own. Together, they change the character of the civilization. You walk through the Athenian marketplace again. The city continues its ordinary rhythm. A fisherman carries his catch. A potter works at a wheel. A merchant negotiates with a customer. A group of citizens discusses politics. Life continues. The story reminds you that civilizations are built from ordinary choices. The grand buildings are only the visible part. Underneath them are habits, values, laws, relationships, expectations, the way people treat one another. You turn toward the harbor. Ships are preparing to depart. Athens was a maritime society too. It depended heavily on the sea. It understood naval power. It traded across the Mediterranean. So the contrast between Athens and Atlantis is not simply between a land city and a sea empire. Both understand the ocean. Both benefit from it. Both possess ambition. The difference lies in what Plato wants each civilization to represent. You watch a ship move slowly beyond the harbor. Its sail catches the wind. The vessel becomes smaller. You think about the stories sailors might carry from one coast to another. News, rumors, legends, descriptions of distant places. Perhaps that is how Atlantis feels so natural in this world. Ancient sailors were constantly moving. They encountered new islands, new cultures, new landscapes. They returned with stories. Some were accurate, some were exaggerated, some were impossible to verify. The boundary between geography and mythology could be very thin. You leave the harbor and return toward the city. The afternoon is warm now. Shadows gather beneath the buildings. You stop beside a stone wall. Somewhere beyond the city is the imagined Atlantis. Somewhere beyond that is the open Atlantic. But you are beginning to understand that the real destination of the story may not be a location at all. It may be an idea. Plato uses Atlantis to ask what happens when a powerful civilization loses its sense of balance. And perhaps that is why the story survived. A geographical mystery might have faded. A philosophical question does not. Every generation can ask it again. What happens when success becomes arrogance? What happens when wealth becomes more important than wisdom? What happens when a society becomes so confident in its strength that it forgets how fragile it really is? You sit beneath the olive tree once more. The wind is soft. The city sounds become distant. Your thoughts begin to slow. You imagine Athens and Atlantis side by side. Two cities. Two visions. Two possible futures. One becomes the symbol of restraint. The other becomes the symbol of excess. And somewhere between them is the human tendency to want more. You stand again. The sun begins to sink toward the horizon. It is time to return to the sea. As darkness arrives, the boundary between Greece and Atlantis fades. You see the ocean, you hear the water, and in the distance, the imagined island waits beneath the night sky. But now you understand that its greatest danger may never have been earthquakes or waves. It may have been something much quieter: ambition. And tomorrow, you will follow that ambition as Atlantis reaches the height of its power. You return to the sea just before sunrise. The horizon is almost completely dark. Only a thin line of pale light separates the ocean from the sky. You stand on the deck of an imagined Atlantean ship, listening to the quiet creaking of wood beneath your feet. The city is behind you. Atlantis is still sleeping, or perhaps it is already awake. Somewhere in the harbor, workers are preparing cargo. Ropes are being checked, sails are being folded and unfolded, barrels are being moved. The first boats are beginning to leave the docks. You watch them carefully. This is the side of Atlantis that makes the story feel especially powerful. It is not merely a beautiful island. It is a maritime power. Its strength comes from the sea. Its ships connect it to distant lands. Its harbor carries wealth into the city, and in the distance, the imagined island waits beneath the night sky. But now you understand that its greatest danger may never have been earthquakes or waves. It may have been something much quieter: ambition. And tomorrow, you will follow that ambition as Atlantis reaches the height of its power. You return to the sea just before sunrise. The horizon is almost completely dark. Only a thin line of pale light separates the ocean from the sky. You stand on the deck of an imagined Atlantean ship, listening to the quiet creaking of wood beneath your feet. The city is behind you. Atlantis is still sleeping, or perhaps it is already awake. Somewhere in the harbor, workers are preparing cargo. Ropes are being checked, sails are being folded and unfolded, barrels are being moved. The first boats are beginning to leave the docks. You watch them carefully. This is the side of Atlantis that makes the story feel especially powerful. It is not merely a beautiful island. It is a maritime power. Its strength comes from the sea. Its ships connect it to distant lands. Its harbor carries wealth into the city. But within the story, Atlantis is presented as a major maritime force. You imagine what that might have looked like: a fleet of wooden ships leaving the harbor. Some carry merchants. Some carry soldiers. Some transport food and building materials. Others travel simply to explore or establish connections with distant communities. The sea becomes a highway. You watch another vessel beside you. Its crew works together. One sailor adjusts a rope. Another checks the sail. Someone watches the horizon. There are no engines, no metal navigation systems. The ship depends on wind, current, stars, and experience. Every journey requires knowledge. A sailor must understand weather. He must recognize coastlines. He must know where fresh water can be found. He must know how to read the sea. The ocean is not empty. It has patterns, and experienced sailors learn them. You sail through the morning. The island disappears behind the horizon. Now there is only ocean. The water rises and falls gently. A few clouds drift across the sky. The ship moves steadily westward. You begin thinking about how important the sea was to ancient civilizations. The Mediterranean connected dozens of cultures. Ships carried ideas as easily as they carried goods. A new style of pottery could travel from one region to another. A metalworking technique could spread. A religious story could cross the water. A word from one language could enter another. Trade did more than enrich cities. It connected people. In the Atlantis story, this network becomes enormous. The island is imagined as the center of a powerful maritime world. You picture its ships arriving at distant ports. People on the shore watch them approach. The vessels are unfamiliar. Their cargo is valuable. Their sailors speak with different accents. The visitors bring new goods. The local people have goods of their own. A marketplace forms. Trade begins. The process is peaceful when both sides benefit. But maritime power can also become political power. A civilization with many ships can influence coastal communities. It can protect trade routes. It can demand payment. It can control access to important harbors. It can project military strength far beyond its own coastline. That is where the story begins to change. Atlantis is no longer simply a prosperous island. It becomes an empire. You imagine the royal officials studying maps. The coastline is marked. Harbors are listed. Shipping routes are recorded. Resources are noted. The island sits at the center. Lines extend outward. Each line represents influence. The farther the lines travel, the larger the imagined empire becomes. You stand beside a table in the royal council chamber. A large map lies across it. Of course, the map is not like a modern map. It is incomplete. It represents only what the people know. The edges of the world are uncertain. But the rulers are confident. They believe they can reach farther. They believe their ships can travel farther. They believe their power can continue expanding. You look at the map. That confidence is impressive. It is also dangerous. History is full of powerful societies that believed expansion could continue forever. Sometimes it does. Until it doesn't, you leave the council chamber and return to the harbor. The sun is high now. The docks are busy. Workers unload cargo from arriving ships. Merchants inspect goods. Sailors repair damaged ropes. Children watch the activity from a safe distance. The harbor feels like the heart of Atlantis. Everything flows through it. Food comes in. Materials arrive. News arrives. People leave. Ideas leave. Wealth leaves. Power leaves. You stand at the edge of the dock and watch a large ship arrive. Its sail is marked with a simple emblem. The vessel slows. Ropes are thrown. Workers pull it toward the pier. A wooden ramp is placed against the side. The crew begins unloading. You notice how organized the process is. A powerful maritime civilization needs logistics. Ships need supplies. Ports need storage. Workers need food. Routes need maintenance. The empire may look impressive from a distance, but its strength depends on thousands of ordinary systems working correctly. You follow a group of workers toward the warehouses. Inside, the air is cooler. Clay containers are stacked along the walls. Grain is stored carefully. Tools and materials are organized. Nothing here looks glamorous, but this is where power becomes real. A temple may represent wealth. A palace may represent authority. But warehouses represent survival. Without food, the city cannot function. Without timber, ships cannot be repaired. Without metal, tools cannot be made. Without workers, nothing moves. You step back into the sunlight. A breeze comes from the sea. You can smell salt in the air. The harbor continues its endless rhythm. You begin to imagine Atlantis at the height of its influence. Ships in every direction. Coastal settlements connected to its trade. Officials managing distant territories. Merchants becoming wealthy. Sailors becoming skilled. Rulers becoming confident. Perhaps too confident. You climb a stone staircase overlooking the harbor. From here you can see the fleet. Dozens of vessels rest in the water. Some are small, others are larger. Their masts rise against the sky. The scene is impressive. For a moment you understand why a civilization might believe it was destined to dominate. Power is visible. It can be counted. Ships, soldiers, walls, gold, land. But wisdom is harder to see. A civilization can measure its wealth. It can count its ships. It can calculate its harvest. It can build higher walls. But it cannot easily measure humility. And that may be the weakness Plato wants you to notice. You remain on the terrace. The sun begins to move toward afternoon. One ship leaves the harbor. Then another. Their sails catch the wind. They travel toward distant horizons. You wonder what their crews believe lies ahead. New markets? New lands? New opportunities? Or simply another day at sea? The ocean does not answer. It continues beneath them. The same water that carries Atlantean wealth also separates Atlantis from everything else. The island may be powerful, but it is still an island. You watch the ships disappear. The harbor grows quieter. The afternoon breeze becomes cooler. You turn back toward the city. The great maritime power of Atlantis surrounds you. Its wealth is visible everywhere. Its influence reaches far beyond its shores, and yet, the farther its power extends, the more fragile its balance becomes. Because every empire carries a hidden question. How far is far enough? And what happens when the desire to expand becomes stronger than the wisdom to stop? You walk slowly along the harbor wall. The sun sinks lower. Atlantis glows beneath the evening light. For now, everything is still under control. The ships return. The markets prosper. The fields produce food. The rulers remain confident. The city stands strong, but the story is moving closer to the moment when confidence becomes something else. You look toward the open sea. Dark clouds are beginning to gather far away.